So in the middle of a miracle is one woman's response to this pandemic. I think Mary Magdalene could have sang this song right after Jesus was crucified, if she had her wits about her to not just deal with what was going on, but to go, I see what this is. I see what's really happening here. So again, one woman's story, one woman's decision to literally say what she sees going on. Now, right now, there are billions of stories going on in the world. And the question is, which one is yours? So here are some of Margaret's lyrics. She says, in the middle of a miracle, the sky can turn to black. Well, that's true, right? I mean, the relative world of form, we're looking at what's going on here. In the middle of a miracle, you feel you'll never bounce back. So that comes to me as a question saying, do I believe I am, as Eric just said, bigger than what's going on? Or am I somehow being pulled down because of what's going on? Am I somehow making myself smaller because of everything that's going on? And I love that she says, you're not bouncing back, you're breaking through. Again, one woman's version of this. Her story is you're not breaking down, you're not falling apart, you're breaking through. One woman's story. The things you wouldn't dream but ache to do, the storm has come to bear a brighter view in the middle of a miracle. So the title of my talk today is The Miraculous Breakthrough. So a miraculous breakthrough. We can be right now in the middle of a miraculous breakthrough, or we can be in the tragedy of what's going on. And I liken that back to over 2,000 years ago when Jesus of Nazareth went through what he went through, and the apostles went through what they went through. I think that song could have been sung to the apostles to let them know, guys, I get that you're all upset about what's going on here. But do you know what's really going on here? On Easter Sunday, we're asked to believe that Jesus resurrected from the dead, that Jesus was put into a stone, into a cave, and a stone was pushed across it that would take a lot of people to close, and then to find out that the only one sitting there was Mary Magdalene. When they opened it up, he was gone. Now, either Mary had done a lot of workouts prior to that stone being pushed in, or it was a miracle. So the question becomes, what do you believe? Where is your mind going? Is it succumbing to the world, to the race consciousness of the world right now? Or are you willing to see what's maybe inherent in what's going on? I believe that's what Margaret is saying. She says, and this is one of my favorite lyrics maybe you've ever written, it's more of a setup than an upset. That's like genius. It's more of a setup than an upset. This is a setup, folks. This coronavirus is setting us up for something. Yes, it's upsetting a lot of people. I spoke to my Aunt Carolyn on my way here, and she was like, in her best Philly accent, oh my God, Jimmy, I am stuck in the basement. No one will come near me because I'm so old. I was like, well, they're trying to protect you. She goes, well, I'm old. I'm going to die anyway. And I was like, well, that's a good point. I said, then go upstairs. Leave your house. No one's forcing you in there. She goes, yeah, they are. So the question is, you can be all upset about this, but it is a setup. As soon as I heard that lyric, Margaret, I was like, that's it. That is totally it. We are being set up to do something, to know something better. Now, here's the deal. Jesus was set up too. He set himself up. He totally set himself up. Why would you go into the den of thieves? Why would you walk into where you know they hate you? Why would you just give yourself over? Why would you go through all of that when all it took for you to say was, I denounce what I've been saying, and you're free. You're no longer going to be killed. He didn't. He set it up. He set it up to try to show the world, according to this story, because I know there are those out there who think this is just a story, but in the story, he sets it up so that he can create the understanding we are more than our bodies. We are more than this flesh and blood. And that's what that story was all about. And look what has happened. I mean, it has been set up brilliantly because 2,000 years later, he's still probably the most popular person on earth, today even. So it's more of a setup than an upset. Out of the dark, I love your bridge. This is like one of your best bridges. Out of the dark, there comes a light, and suddenly there's an end end in sight. It isn't forever. It's just finite. This unwelcomed isolation. So I think Jesus knew that what he was going through was going to end. Obviously, life ends. His life ended. I think he knew that. But out of that came a light. And we talk about Jesus as the light. We talk about Jesus as the Christ, the light that shone onto the world, that taught love. So what are we finding out? That's what I want to know. What are we willing to find out from this pandemic? What are we willing to take away from this? What are we willing to have set up so that as we move through this, and this will end, this will be gone, what are we willing to walk away from this with? Are we going to just keep reacting, or are we going to start acting from the truth and asking ourselves deeper questions? Open your eyes and breathe again, she says. You're better than you have ever been. We all need an earthquake now and then, an earthquake now and then to shake us from sedation. Well-chosen word, sedation, because I do believe that this planet, this world, has been asleep. And I certainly believe, as I watch countries pit themselves one against the other, play with nuclear weapons as though they're games, not pay attention to what the earth is asking us to pay attention to. When I watch that, I see a world that is sedated by all the stuff out there, believing that and not believing the truth. And frankly, that's what happened over 2,000 years ago when Jesus came and said, we must love one another. His job, what he felt his job was to take the Jewish traditions and make sense out of them in a more contemporary way for him. And he tried. And people did not really hear. And they went back to sleep. And so much so that religion, the very religion that sprung up in his name, became the next series of groups that fought each other and killed each other in his name. The exact opposite of what he was trying to teach. So again, we're at another pivotal moment in time, folks. We are being set up to do what? That's really the big question. And then, very funny line, I promise not to lay there and lament if you're going through hell, don't pitch a tent. Well, maybe we are going through hell. Maybe there's some people really going through hell. And I do not take lightly or discount the people who have lost lives and the families who have lost people to this virus. But the question is going to be, are we going to learn from it? Or are we going to pitch a tent in Helltown and stay there? Are we just going to complain, or are we going to say our truth? Are we going to complain that the government hasn't done enough, or are we going to do what it takes to make the government do what it needs to do? These are the questions we have to ask ourselves. As Ernest Holmes says, show me a man who is for something and against nothing, and I will show you the next Christ. That's what he says. So what are we for? What are we going to take from this and create out of this? So in the middle of a miracle, the lovely ending to the song, you have to believe. You have to believe. But, Margaret's smart. She's not going to tell you what to believe. She's going to just tell you to believe. We don't tell you what to think. We teach you how to think in religious science. And my job is to ask you, if she says in the middle of a miracle you have to believe, my question for you is, believe what? What are you going to believe? I grew up Catholic, just like Eric, but I was going to be a priest. I loved Catholicism. I loved Jesus. I had such a deep, deep relationship with Jesus that I lost along the way, and I have found again. So the question is, what are you going to believe? Well, back then, back in Jesus' time, they believed a lot of stuff. They believed he had 37 miracles notated. And his first miracle, anybody remember what his first one was? That was it, turning the water into wine at the marriage at Cana. So that was his very first miracle. Can you imagine what everybody was talking about then? Thank God there was no social media then. Imagine, he would have been a phenomenon. But instead, the word just started to spread. Here's a man that can change water into wine. He's a miracle worker. He is a miracle man. So that's what started. And along the way, he would heal the sick. He would cleanse lepers. He raised the dead. He found coins in fishes' mouths so that he could pay his taxes. I mean, that was a cool miracle. I mean, someone threw that in the water and the fish ate it, but nonetheless, it was a great, great miracle. He restored the severed ear. of one of his accusers, not to mention the loaves and fishes on the mount, and of course, walking on water. Now, I've always said that probably it was low tide and the apostles were all drunk, and one of them woke up and went, and Jesus decided to walk on the sea, on the shore, and one of the apostles woke up and went, dudes, he's walking on water, and thus the miracle. Now, it's a fun story. My son loves it when I say it, but I'm back to the understanding that what if he did walk on water? So the question is, we have so many things that we used to believe that we don't believe that seem silly. And the question now has to be, am I willing to relook at all of this? Am I willing, in the midst of this pandemic, when everything is asking me to slow the heck down, am I willing to question everything? You know, I got off the phone yesterday with Margaret and she asked me to consider something. My instinct was no. My instinct was go back to what I believed then, which was about 5 or 6 years ago. Go back to what I believed then. I got off the phone and I heard it in my head. I was like, why did you just give the rote answer when it's 5 years later? New information. I went online, checked the information out. Margaret was right. I changed my mind. Are we willing to not know what we think we know in order to be set up in such a way that there is more to know and more to be, which I think this pandemic is going to take us to? So all of these loaves and fishes and walking on water, in the middle of a miracle, what do you think the apostles were thinking? I couldn't help thinking that this week. What were the apostles thinking during this week, watching their beloved mentor, be dragged through the streets, being tortured, a crown of thorns on his head, blood oozing, piercing his side? What were people thinking watching this? How can you watch this and still know the truth, stay in the truth, still love the message and the messenger in that case? Well, the same question goes for us today. How can we see everything that's going on but still know the truth? Still be willing to see what is going to come out of this? Now, I don't know how well the apostles did. I know that a lot of them ran away and shut themselves in and couldn't deal with it. I know that Mary Magdalene stayed and Mary, his mother, stayed, but that most of the apostles ran, which is an interesting thing to question. What does it take to stand in the middle of a miracle, which most people are calling horror, but it's a miracle? Are you willing to stand in your truth in the midst of all of this and still know the good that is unopposed? So, my big question is, do you think the apostles knew what was going on? Do you think they could see into the future what was going to come out of this? Do you think they ever imagined the world that would spring up from the death and resurrection of Jesus? I don't think so. I don't think so. So how could we be expected to really understand what this global epidemic is doing for us? We can't. It's impossible to step back far enough to see where this takes us. And yet, people like Margaret come along and write songs like this. Write songs saying, no, it's good. There is good here. There's great. It's going to come from this. Don't pitch a tent. Keep moving through it. So, what are we bringing forth from this? I have something very interesting to read to you. When I say how do we make sense out of this, I'm going to go back to 1927 when Ernest Holmes was asked, or maybe not asked, but he decided to make sense out of the resurrection. Now remember, religious science came from Christianity. Most people in New Thought were Christian ministers or Christian writers. Ralph Waldo Emerson, a Christian, but also a writer and a transcendentalist. So, what do we make out of these things? Here's what Ernest Holmes said, and I mean no disrespect to this man. He is one of my greatest teachers. But here's how he made sense out of the resurrection in 1927, when it was very Christian in scope, the way he was teaching science of mind. He said this: the physical disappearance of Jesus after his resurrection was the result of the spiritualization of his consciousness, This so quickened his mentality that his body disintegrated and his followers could not see him because he was on another plane. Really? I mean, I love you, Ernest Holmes, but his body disintegrated because his mind reached a conscious level of Christhood. Now, that's my first reaction. It's like, come on, really? Is that how you're going to figure this out? And yet, what do I know? I'll leave room for that to be possible. But I also leave room for this. Why? Why do we work so hard to make sense out of miracles? Why do we work so hard to make sense out of something like, did he rise up or did he not? Did they steal him and take him off to India where he had a fruitful life? Or did he really die and they just hid his body? Or did they just lie? Did they just lie because it's a better story to tell? You know, bury him quickly. He rose from the dead. I don't know. So many different possibilities here. Ernest Holmes had his own, which sounded a lot like science fiction to me. But if you stand back far enough, the question has to become, is this a miracle or is this a tragedy? Is this a breakthrough or is this a breakdown? Frankly, it's all going to depend on you. I don't know what they're going to say about the 2020 pandemic in 3020. I don't know what they're going to say about it in 4020, but they're going to say something. And you know why they're going to say something? They're going to say something because you told your story. You will tell your story to the next person, to the next generation. Margaret's song will live on, and her story will be that. And I don't know which story is going to win. Certainly Jesus' story didn't win, did it? Not really. We've never, ever really lived the Christianity. It's not even a word he would have chosen. We've never lived Jesus' message outright to see if it works because the stories went elsewhere. So my question to you today, it's making me very overwhelmed, is if you're going to tell your story, and you are, we're all going to tell the story of the 2020 pandemic, what's that story going to be? Are we going to finally wake up? Are we going to finally rise above all of this and see the good and see that we are all one people living on one planet and that we are the same person innately? So what's it going to be? It's really up to you. It really depends on whatever story you decide to tell. I'm grateful that Margaret Owens told this story. And I can tell you, I'm starting to pay great attention to what stories come out of my mouth as life continues to unfold with unopposed goodness. Namaste.